Now the floor is given to Dr. Olaf Glöckner, University of Potsdam, Modest Mendelssohn Center for Jewish Studies. He will explain us his view, present his view on the early stages of establishment of diplomatic and other relations between Israel and its major continental European ally, Federal Republic of Germany. So, Olaf, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I just wait for the beginning of the
Now you have it.
PowerPoint. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, in the middle of the 20th century, there have been a lot of new state foundations, not only on the European continent, Africa, and many other places, but three new state foundations of single specific meanings have been with Israel in 1948 and with two German successor states of the so-called Nazi Third Reich. In the spring of 1994, we witnessed the establishment of the Federal Republic of Germany, in short, West Germany, a country which is associated with names like Konrad Adenauer. I will come back later on, more extensive to Adenauer, Ludwig Erhard, and at later points, persons like Willy Brandt, Helmut Schmidt, and Helmut Kohl. The other state foundation as successor state of the Third Reich, the East German satellite state of Moscow, the so-called German Democratic Republic. It won't be the topic here for my presentation because of the simple fact that there have never been diplomatic relations between East Germany, between the GDR and Israel. If we go to the archives, we can find some kind of secret negotiations, and of course some kinds of contacts have been across the decades, but this is not the topic of today. And okay, we have these three new very young states. Each of them are in different trouble, in different cases of problems in their formative years. But the question, the fundamental questions of that time was, how can Israel and the two successor states of the so-called Third Reich, how can they relate each other? Or is there anyway any opportunity to relate each other because of the simply one word is enough, because of Auschwitz and the Shoah? Because this was an exceptional case in the frame of World War II, because Nazi Germany followed politics of annihilation, just to murder, want to kill one people is intended to kill another people just because for its very existence. And that has been a new kind of quality of genocidal politics and of war crimes politics in general. So Germany, both states of Germany had the problem after 1948, after their foundation, just to find any way back in the community of decent states, of civilized states, not only to be a part of the practical increasing new blocks of the new political systems, of the East Bloc system for the GDR and for the inside the European Union, European community in economy, and maybe find a way into the NATO. But to find, I mean it in a cultural way, is there an opportunity, and at which point of time is there an opportunity for the new German states to find back in the community of normal states? And yeah, thank you very much. The situation, I start with Germany. In general, the situation was clear. Germany lost World War II, the infrastructure of the country was almost completely destroyed. This is one point. There is the challenge to build up a country completely new from its infrastructure, but also the inner recreation, the inner reconstruction. That meant Germany had the new German governments, the founding fathers of both states. They faced the challenge just to build up new political parties, new trade unions, to just at least to attempt to try to form new civic organizations and administration. Everything had to be done again from the scratch. This was the huge inner challenges, the inner challenge, and the huge challenge on the international relations, and then it was to fight back in the family of the other states. For Israel, the situation was quite different. I'm not going too much in detail now about this formative year and the beginning first war, the War of Independence, 48 and 49. It was clear that even when Israel was able to win its first wars, a lot of other troubling problems had to be solved. Economic weakness and lack of infrastructure to absorb all these masses of hundreds and thousands of Jewish migrants who came to Israel, not only at the end of the 1940s, but also from the North African states and from the countries from the Middle East. Hundreds of thousands of new citizens had to be integrated. And all this together, economical crisis, capacities, and the constant danger of war, there was a real scenario that the Jewish state could even collapse in its first years. We forget this critical situation sometimes at the end of the 40s, at the beginning of the 1950s, and there haven't been any strong partners at all, at least not among the superpowers, and also not strong neighbor states. On the contrary, you have a hostile environment all around. So invention is the mother of success, as some people say, and Israeli strategic plannings had to try to think about a lot of different options, and one option just to stabilize its the young state was to formulate a demand of reparations or compensations from the successor state of the Third Reich, and just to send a note to the states of to the GDR and to the FRJ, just to call for compensation for that what happened and to help Israel in its actual situation. But of course, Israel did not go in contact with these two new German states by itself. They asked the allies, the successful allies of World War II, that means the United States, Soviet Union, France, and the UK. But the allies at that time, at that point of time, at the beginning of the 1950s, they just had some problems of their own. They were thinking in new strategic patterns. They were just working on new coalitions. They were not that amused just to deal with the Israeli requirements to East Germany and West Germany. But at the end of the day, they kindly forwarded the Israeli demands to both German states. And this was the first litmus test. What about the readiness of the successor states of the Third Reich to reply on these Israeli demands? A serious challenge, and East Germany from the very beginning kindly ignored it. They just said, no, we have a completely new political and social system in the German Democratic Republic. We cut it all roots of chauvinism, of fascism, and of anti-Semitism. We are clean, and this is more than this is more weighting than any kind of paying or selling reparations or compensations. West Germany took it a bit more serious, and in 1952 they started just with some kinds of negotiations in the Dutch place Castel Oud-Wassenaar near Den Haag. Very difficult negotiations for a couple of months, but finally on September the 10th in 1952, first small success had been done. The Israeli Foreign Minister Moshe Sharet and the German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, they were able to sign the so-called Luxembourg Treaty, which came into activity then in spring of 1953. And according to this agreement, West Germany obliged itself to pay Israel for the cost of resettling a greater number of uprooted and destitute Jewish refugees after the war, and to compensate individual Jews via the Conference on Jewish Material Claims against Germany for losses in Jewish livelihood and property resulting from Nazi persecution. In the outcome of the Luxembourg Treaty, West Germany committed itself to pay a sum of 3 billion marks over a time span of 14 years, and additional 450 million marks were paid to the Jewish Claims Conference. These payments were done to the State of Israel as the heir to those victims who had no surviving relatives and families at all. What was done with the money? Or how did the transfer work? Most of the money was invested in the country's infrastructure, very important at the time, and it played an important role in stabilizing the Israeli economy in general. Among the technical goods that were provided, there were lorries, all kinds of different machines, and as we can see here in this picture, also in railway set. However, this was one side, but a kind of close, pragmatic working together between Israel and the Federal Republic of Germany. The practical transfer, the practical solution of this Luxembourg Treaty was quite correct, prompt, and reliable. It worked, we could say it worked within this course of the 14 years, but it does not mean that any wider personal contacts came into function. Contacts between single individual German persons and Israelis in the time remain as a very exceptional case. At a later point of time in my presentation, I will refer to the relations between, or even such kind of friendship between David Ben-Gurion and Konrad Adenauer, because this has been top politicians, Ben-Gurion as the Prime Minister of Israel, as the long-standing Prime Minister in his first years, and Adenauer as the German Chancellor. What they did was just kind of politics from above. And nevertheless, also for these two guys, the situation was not that easy when it came to the ratification of the Luxembourg Treaty. I start with Konrad Adenauer. Adenauer had to face the problem that a lot of German politicians at the beginning of the 1950s, they were not ready for such a treatment because they said, we are suffering a lot by ourselves. Our economy is still very weak because we are at the stage of after war. We have to build up our own economy, our own infrastructure. And they openly opposed the Luxembourg Treaty. Even many politicians of its own camp, and as you know, Adenauer was the head of the newly founded Christian Democratic Union, the main political force in Germany until today. But a lot of people rejected to follow him in his decision, and it was not clear whether Konrad Adenauer could succeed with the ratification of the Luxembourg Treaty in the German parliament, in the Bundestag. So he was very much dependent from the Social Democrats, at that time the political opposition. But wisely and fortunately, the Social Democrats, they followed him and said, okay, we back you here. Otherwise, Germany would have had its first serious governmental crisis at the time. And if we come to Israel for Ben-Gurion, it was also not easy because a lot of Israeli people, a lot of Holocaust survivors, and a lot of very angry Israeli Jews said, "Are you going to now to sell the blood of our victims?" And so this was a very emotional case for Israel, even when Ben-Gurion tried to explain that he needed the German help to survive and to stabilize Israel in a way that he did not collapse in his first year. So it was on the streets of Jerusalem. You had a lot of outcries and you had a lot of riots, and it was not sure. It was not sure. Will a majority vote in the German Bundestag for the Luxembourg Treaty, and even less sure in Israel, but finally, narrowly, the bill for the Luxembourg Treaty passed the Knesset then. I come back to some kind of psychological aspects and inner debates in Germany. Germany succeeded very quickly in the course of the 1950s with rebuilding its own economy. There's this word of the German economic wonder, even a couple of years after World War II in 1954, they succeeded to get again world champion in football and all these things. So the Germans just had they had a kind of how to call it, maybe revitalization, but at the same time just ignoring and suppressing what was on from 1933 until 1945, where it was the dictatorship and all the crimes in World War II. So, but despite this tendency just to look forward and to forget the own past, smaller groups of Germans started to feel a kind of remorse. They feel remorse, and especially as Christians, just discussing among themselves, how could it happen? What was the point that a European continent who understands itself mainly as a Christian continent, and Germany, 90% of the Germans under Hitler, under the Nazi dictatorship, were still members of huge, big Christian congregations, Catholics and Protestant. How could it happen that the Nazi barbaros could murder so many Jews, but at least a part of the German population was just doing nothing against the exclusion of the Jews from German society? And in Germany this was a long process, a long time before World War II. So these Christians, I cannot tell you if it was a majority, some very active Christians, they started to discuss these questions in their inner circle, but at the same time they were willing just to do anything in a kind of active repentance. So some organizations emerged quickly in the 1950s. One of the most prominent was the society, which is organization, it's called Action Sign of Reconciliation, Peace Services ASF, the German word is Aktion Sühnezeichen Friedensdienste. This organization was ready to send young people to all kinds of cities where the Germans did the main crimes in World War II, and in 1961 ASF was also successful to build a branch in Israel and to send young people from the young generation there, mainly to work in homes for elderly who had survived the Shoah, but had their own traumata, of course, among themselves. So this is it became a very successful story, continuing until our days. Another thing was that there was a kind of, especially among the young generations of Germans, there was a lot of sympathy for some special segments of the young Israeli society, including the kibbutz movement and the kibbutz systems. Of course, not only German volunteers went up to be volunteering in Israeli kibbutzim up from the 1960s, but in an increasing number we had also Germans who were interested just to do anything for Israel, at least for a kind of months, but at the same time also to look and to compare these different kinds of social and political models and to think about the models for the future. And there was an interesting, in 1962, one very interesting combination happened in the north of Israel, a small village called Nes Amim in the north of Nahariya. This is a combination of Christians who went to Israel just to say we invest some years of our life, we want to support Israel. What kind of economy is needed? Okay, we can plant vegetables, we can do some kind of industry, but we are Christians, and when the day is over, at the end of the week, we would be happy to get in touch with Jews and to, at the same time, to do some kinds of Christian-Jewish exchange. Nes Amim got started also a successful story. The founder was from the Netherlands, but a lot of Germans followed him in this enterprise. And there have been also at the beginning of in the formative years of Israel, or at least until 1967, there was also a lot of sympathy for Israel among the German left, like generally among the European left, and also among the trade unions and the main roof organization, the main roof organization in Germany, the Deutscher Gewerkschaftsbund, the League of German Trade Unions. They started early contacts to all kinds of branches with the Israeli Istatut. But anyway, all these kind of contacts which came up step by step, they didn't. They could not just finish all kind of uncertainties, and the shadows of the Shoah, of course, have been omnipresent in Israel as well as in Germany. Especially when there was a trend in West Germany, the Easterners, East Germany could hide it a little bit. But in West Germany, in the course of the 1950s and the 1960s, we have a development that a lot of former Nazi criminals succeeded to come back to politics, or at least to top positions in their own professional fields. One of the most, maybe the most abhorrent example was the case of Hans Glöckner. Hans Glöckner was a famous lawyer in Russia, and then very successful under Adolf Hitler. He was one of the co-authors of the Nuremberg racial laws by 1935. Try to imagine, he was one of the authors and one of the commentators. So the Nuremberg racial laws were the basic to figure out who's Jewish in Germany and who is not. So it's a question of life and death. And Hans Glöckner, he disappeared for a while, but in 1953 he came back to the political stage, and for 10 years he became the head of the Chancellor's office in Germany, in Bonn. So one of the most top political positions. There were a lot of protests, of Jewish protests, non-Jewish protests from Israel, from other states, from inside Germany. But it failed. Glöckner could held its position for 10 years, and such developments, of course, made a lot of new distance also between Israel and West Germany. But then it happened, the case with Adolf Eichmann. Something spectacular, as you know, the Mossad the Mossad special unit of the Mossad was able to catch Adolf Eichmann in May 1960 in Argentine. Adolf Eichmann, the chief organizer or chief architect of the Shoah, and in 1961 the trial against Adolf Eichmann could begin, and for the first time, we have to say, the whole system of Nazi German politics of annihilation against the Jewish people were put on trial. In Jerusalem, not in Germany, but in Jerusalem. And the whole system was on trial, typified by the person of Adolf Eichmann. Eichmann was sentenced to death, but the trial itself went the shocking remembrance on the Shoah horror in detail. Holocaust survivors who had lost all or most of their relatives and friends gave their last power to describe the horror there as witnesses on the trial, all the horror of the death camps, and to show the daily horror of Nazi barbarism, and they collapsed during the hearings, as you can see on one of the pages there on the right. 15? 15, good. So, interestingly was at the margin of the Eichmann trial that first of all Germany did not protest against the hijacking of one of his citizens. Eichmann was a German citizen. They did not intervene, maybe for tactical reasons, because otherwise they should have organized the trial against Eichmann in Berlin or in Bonn itself, so that could make some other problems, because Eichmann wouldn't be treated as a single case. So, but on the other way, on the diplomatic level, they did not intervene, they did not protest, and it was a kind of sign that they accepted how Israel handled the case of Adolf Eichmann, including the death sentence. Another thing, you know, that lots of intellectuals, the worldwide public was great. It was the Eichmann trial was a historic moment where a lot of people around the world realized what really happened in the Shoah, and so the German media, interestingly, reported continuously and described it in a similar way like the others. Like the other media from other cities, as what it was, as the crimes of the SS, and it followed a couple of years later the first trials against Nazi top officers and murderers, especially from the SS, followed then in German cities like the Auschwitz, the so-called Auschwitz trials in Frankfurt am Main up from 1963. So there was a kind of repercussion, a kind of impact of the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem from 60 to the further development in Germany, also in the juridical way. In the whole time, until the mid of the early 1960s, this was an outstanding and a special relationship between David Ben-Gurion and Konrad Adenauer. I've already mentioned they did politics from above, but they were a kind of you cannot see a more different biographical developments, and also the types of personalities might have been very contrasting, but at the same time they were in a kind of were very similar. Just to say, we have very young states, we have to look forward, and we have to look forward also despite of the past. We have to look forward what is possible together and what is not possible. And from this point of view, I would say I see it in a similar way like the historian and publicist David Wittstüm, who said he described this as a well-going political partnership, finally with a lot of blessings for both sides. Let's do what we can do together, and what is not working, that's not working. And you see that Adenauer and Ben-Gurion, they met in their political life, I think only 2 or 3 or maximum 4 times. But if they met, they spoke turbulence, and they made decisive steps for cooperation between both countries. And when Adenauer was already 1966, I think Ben-Gurion was also out of office already in 1966. Adenauer for sure, and then even as a private person, he came to visit Ben-Gurion in the kibbutz in Sde-Boker, as you can see here on this picture. Nevertheless, if we come to the question of diplomatic relations, that lasted for a longer time. We could discuss why, and some people said, no, if Germany, or at least the Federal Republic of Germany and Israel have such a lot of economic connections, and they can start to maybe with cultural things, and the trade unions are working together. Why not also to say as a kind of symbol of solidarity also from the German side, and let's enhance the step, let's establish diplomatic relations. other people in both countries. There were political forces in both countries which strongly rejected it and said it's much too early to go on this way. And in 1965, this is the area after Ben-Gurion and after Konrad Adenauer, they didn't succeed in this step. But in 1965, the time had come. Interestingly, you know, the first step for diplomatic relations is the exchange of ambassadors. I don't know what happened I asked myself what happened with the German government, that they were sending Rolf Friedemann Pauwels to Jerusalem. Rolf Friedemann Pauwels, he was a war veteran, he was a Wehrmacht officer, he lost one of his arms here, very typical on the photographs, not on this one when he takes the hand of Golda Meir. But you could see he was a very active Wehrmacht officer, fighter, and they could send anybody else, maybe a type like Willy Brandt or who else. The Germans were sending a Wehrmacht officer as the first ambassador to Israel in 1965, while Israel was sending Asher Ben Natan, an Austrian Holocaust survivor from Vienna. And then it happened again on the Israeli streets, what already happened in 1953, a huge outcry and lots of protests on the streets in Jerusalem, maybe also in other Israeli cities. Harsh protests were following the announcement of diplomatic relations, public outcry, and chaotic situations on the streets across the summer of 1965. And the police had all hands full to do just to manage and to control the situation. For example, when Rolf Friedemann Pauwels did his inaugural visit in Jerusalem, an angry shouting crowd accompanied him along his car on the street, and the Israeli police had really all hands full to guarantee his personal safety in these first days. These are pictures which we can hardly understand 50 years later. It's surprising sometimes to see it, but this was the emotional situation still in 1965. But on the second glance, I will talk at last point of my presentation a little bit about two fields which are unusually, you can't believe how close in these first years also were the cooperation in military issues and also the cooperation on intelligence things. First, army cooperation. This traced back until the middle of the 1950s. In 1955, Germany began manufacturing some patrol boats for the Israeli Coast Guard. 1955, even if it was still forbidden for the Germans to rearm itself and also to produce military goods. And soon the armaments cooperation via informal channels without public knowledge proved to be helpful for both sides. It was more or less secret. Nobody liked to talk about it, not Israel, not Germany, but Israel became an important supplier and partner for the evaluation of Soviet weapon systems, which they succeeded to catch in their first wars, military knowledge to Germany and also, of course, then to the NATO. On the other side, the Germans supplying kinds of weapons which Israel urgently needed and didn't get from any other countries, not even from the United States. Legendary for the early military cooperation have been the contacts by Shimon Peres, General Director in the Israeli Ministry of Defense at that time, and the other guy, the German Franz Josef Strauss, German Minister of Defense from 1956 to 1962. And the supply, the delivery of military goods, it went in both directions. German Rifle Mk98, for example, went to Tzahal soldiers and equipment for tanks as well, while Israel at any point of time delivered Uzi guns for the German Bundeswehr. After the establishment of diplomatic relations, the military cooperation even enlarged. Now it's on a wide scale. And in Greece, for example, shot in recent years, maybe you know it from the news or from any other sources, Germany is supplying Israel with very modern submarine ships until the last years right now. And on a smaller scale, we have even joint military maneuvers of Bundeswehr and IDF, but this is the most recent development. As even more sensible and more difficult appears if we look back to the 1950s, early 1950s, the whole issue of early German-Israeli intelligence cooperation. Such an enterprise, try to imagine, required Israelis who were ready to work with former Nazi criminals, at least Wehrmacht, officers, and with outright anti-Semites who just a few years before could have been actively involved in the Shoah. For example, the predecessor of the BND, the most important German secret service, Bundesnachrichtendienst, BND, it was built up by a former Wehrmacht General Reinhard Gehlen. The pre-organization was the Organization Gehlen. Gehlen became president of the BND in 1965, and he was very interested in cooperation from himself, very interested in intelligence cooperation with the Mossad. Up from 1956, he was attracted by the Israeli success in the Suez campaign, and then they started to get in touch. And on the Israeli side, head of the Mossad, Issa Harer, was leading a staff of people, of course, of whom many had lost all their relatives and friends in the Shoah. But Germany, as well as Israel, faced the necessity of quickly enlarging their intelligence networks in Europe. In a certain way, they felt alone, both of them. Both shared the problem of being relatively isolated in this field, just a bit similarly to their situation of military cooperation, and paradoxically also in this field, in intelligence cooperation, it was we witnessed a similar successful cooperation like in the military issue. And Harer's real politics decision to work. There is a famous quote: "To work with the devil himself to protect Israel," served as the foundation for a long-standing relationship. Okay. So yes, for a long-standing relationship that grew stronger and stronger in the following decade, when many former Nazi activists just went to pension, and a new generation of BND professionals came in office. I just quit at this point.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Olaf. Okay, dear colleagues, we have time, a few minutes for a couple of questions. Please, please, sir.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich habe zwei Fragen vielleicht. Very fast. First of all, you mentioned about this case of Helen. And
who?
Helen. Helen, and if we speak about this era of so-called Adenauer era in Germany, we remember that it was time when Adenauer actually appointed a lot of ex-Nazis to different structures, not only in this BND, but also in Bundeswehr and in other structures. And you mentioned that this was realpolitik, and it wasn't any criticism from the side of Ben-Gurion. My question is, were any criticism of this policy realpolitik from opposition or some circle of Ben-Gurion, his party, Mapai, and so on? Maybe you don't have such information.
Yeah.
In this case, especially of Oberländer, this is scandalous situation.
Lots of people. Yeah. I mean, I cannot. I don't know about Israel if there would have been an alternative politics to that of Ben-Gurion. How he managed the politics with West Germany, but from the German side, no, there was no alternative. Adenauer was asked in this case of Hans Glöckner. He said, "How can you just have the head of your office of Chancellor is a former Nazi who was the co-author of the Nuremberg racial trials? How can you put him in office? How can you do that?" And he said, Adenauer, who was very close to Ben-Gurion, he said, "Sorry, I don't have any person from this competence and quality in administrative issues now, here in West Germany." He said, "He's the best. He's the best. I cannot miss it. So and Ben Gurion and the Israeli government they accepted. The other thing is if you say about the German Bundeswehr, rearmament and all these things, you sometimes we forget that also in other ministries and other fields, the huge majority of experts had been active Nazis, at least member of the NSDAP. So they couldn't miss competent Wehrmacht generals to build up the Bundeswehr, which was created in the NATO afterwards.
Okay. Please.
Just to point on what you were saying, I understand that one of the big drivers for the security cooperation
Yes.
was the use of ex-Nazis and German scientists in Egypt at the time.
Yes.
And that was seen as being a very important driver from the Israeli side. Was
Yeah.
the German security cooperation in understanding what was going on with the building of the rockets and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
The other thing is Israeli opposition to closer ties with Germany, very much taken up by Menachem Begin. Begin led a protest, famously led a protest in the Knesset,
Yeah.
and was excluded for violently objecting. Was thrown out of the Knesset and led a street protest
Yeah.
outside the building at the time of the recognition. So from the Israeli objection to it.
Yeah. No,
Just a point of clarification, not a question.
Okay. Yes.
Actually, this is a question for both of you. Since the main issue here is the relationship, the special relationship between Ben Gurion and Adenauer,
No, the question is what could work between Israel and the German states, the successor states, in this formative 15 to 20 years until 65. What was possible and why was it possible, and maybe how could it? This is a real question, and Shlomo Spira, for example, he asked this. How could it work that in this teamwork between the Mossad and the BND, how could it, from the psychological point of view, how can people trust each other so much, and they trust it?
but please let me finish the question and then.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm suggesting that perhaps this was the European connection. Yes, the fact that both leaders came from the same European state of mind of real politics, and they need to go forward and don't look backwards on what happened. Maybe this was very typical of Ben Gurion when he led the Zionist organization here in Palestine, later in Israel. And maybe this was the case also in Germany. So is there any European state of mind connected to this whole issue that you just described?
So what do you think about that?
I don't think so. The special thing is Israel had not opportunities to work together. I mean, Joanna showed what is possible today with some parts of Europe, like the Visegrad Group, or what is possible with France, or temporarily Israel was successful to get support or mutual, very benefiting cooperations with parts of Europe for a couple of years. But my thesis is that Israel could choose Germany for mutual benefits to have an exceptional, it's not a normal relationship, it will never be a normal relationship, but to succeed in some kind of special benefiting connections and cooperations which couldn't have been possible with other countries of Europe. For example, with the United Kingdom or France, at any point they rejected delivering for weapons in these wars, in these crucial wars.
So Israel still survived without this weapon.
I don't think.
When France made the embargo on Israel after the 6 Day War, Israel still continued. She developed other ways of finding ways to get the ammunition and the arsenal, and so she could have done the same without the help of Germany. If this was
I think that since you're asking for both of us, so I believe it's much more than that. Well, in principle, we will quote Yaroslav Hitsak, a very famous Ukrainian historian, who said that the way to join the European Union means to jump up the European train to acknowledge their role of your nation in the Holocaust, and that means to have to establish special relations with Israel. Well, and Germany probably was that not just jumped to the train, European train. It was one who was sitting and is sitting in the locomotive of this train. Since Germany is interested to be a European superpower, they probably will continue that. Actually, it's still, in what way, it's a bipartisan issue, like Americans would say. If Christian Democrats will still be in power, that might continue. The question is what happened with the Greens and Social Democrats and so on, whether they would say enough is enough. I think that you are right by indicating, if that's what you mean, that the deepness and the complexity of mutual relations between Berlin and Jerusalem are so deep, they're so complex that it's never give and take at the moment. It's a mutual adaptive, mutual successful relations which Israel is interested, but Germany probably would be interested not less than Israel is interested. So as far as Israel is a sort of a European country, despite of the fact that it exists in the Middle East, they should have special relations with Germany. Germany, since it's a moving point, a moving force of Europe, should not ignore the fact that Mediterranean is a European lake and somehow should be interested with what is going on in its eastern side. So I believe, I hope at least, that what was Dr. Glöckner described at the beginning of mutual relations made a solid and strong fundament for development and for reversal. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate your attention.